If not, I'm going to turn this over to Matt. I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't know Matt, but he is a rural open space planner for the Boone County Planning Commission. He's also a member of the Historic Preservation Review Board, and he's also a member of the advisory board for the Gaines Tavern History Center, which we're making progress on that, folks.
All right. Thank you very much. Should I dim the lights a little bit?
Yes, go ahead.
What's the procedure?
Slide it down.
Slide it down. That's good. Can everybody see this thing all right? All right. I tried to get him to let me do the dual projector thing again, but it's not allowed anymore. So, and I can't use a microphone either. So I had to bring my own stuff with me. As introduced, I am Matt Becker, Boone County's, I've got a ridiculous title. I'm basically the historic preservation guy for the county. Susan Cabot did the job before I came here, so that's kind of the history of where I came from. And what's funny is there's some bizarre connections in this Nicholson story to where I am now. I want to first of all give credit for almost all of the research to a woman named Lori McEntee, who came a year and a half ago to work in my office as an intern. She's an NKU history student, and her professor said, hey, do you have anything, a little project she could tackle? And I said, yeah, I'd like to know everything there is to know about George Nicholson, because I know he had built a lot of things in Boone County, and I wanted to know more about him, and I just had never gotten around to doing it. So she came in and took the bull by the horns and did an amazing amount of research in about 4 months. And started writing the paper, got about halfway through before the internship was up, and it was supposed to be my job to finish up that paper. It's still not done. So I did, however, manage to whip together the presentation for nothing, if nothing else. So the big question is, who's George Nicholson? A lot of the folks in this room actually knew who he was. He was a prominent builder. Today, when you think about builders in Boone County, the names that come to mind are Arlinghouse, Dries, Fisher, Hemmer, Nyer. In the 1910s, 1920s, you would have been talking about folks like Asa McMullen in Burlington, Jess Kirkpatrick in Burlington, another man named Van Landingham down in Walton. But the big name was George Nicholson, and then George Nicholson and Sons. He built more in a six-decade period from about 1900 to 1960 than anybody. Talking churches, schools, banks, countless residences, roads, bridges, on and on and on. Primarily Boone, southern Boone County, Kenton County, and as I understand it, some in Gallup counties, but I have not researched in those counties yet. His success is basically tied to integrity, reputation, market timing, and ability to underbid the competition. In Bruce Ferguson's immortal words, that's why he got the jobs. He underbid everybody, consistently. So, that's what George looked like. Who were the Nicholsons and where did they come from? This is the Nicholson family. I've got a pointer. George, there's George. These pictures all come from Amber Benson, who is the great-granddaughter of George Nicholson. She gave us an amazing amount of material also. Yeah. There's George. I'm guessing about 17 in this picture because this is 1885. There's his father, Henry, his mother, Mary, and various other relatives. The story on the Nicholsons are, this picture was taken in Mount Washington, Ohio, about half a mile from where I live now. So that's where George was born. The Nicholsons came out of Maysville. Jacob Boone, Daniel Boone's first cousin, is George's great-great-grandfather, oddly enough. And when Jacob and Daniel came to Maysville, Jacob hung around, settled the town. Daniel moved on to bigger and better things. Descendants. I'm not going to beget everyone. But ultimately, Henry Clay comes along, George's father, and then eventually George. Henry Clay was an interesting character in his own right. We had no knowledge of before Lori started doing this research. And then we find out some really interesting things about him, so I want to talk about him a little bit. Henry Clay was a surgeon, a doctor, and then an assistant surgeon during the Civil War. It's not clear why he moved from Kentucky over to Mount Washington, but he did. In fact, I know now that he was there. He was in Cincinnati by 1854 and in Mount Washington by 1859. And how do I know that? Because he was not only a doctor, he was like the local community doctor from Mount Washington, but he was sort of an eccentric inventor. How do I get hooked up with all these inventors? I don't know. Here's a picture of Henry and George's brother Charles, 1875. And this is one of Henry's inventions. He was into canning and some other interesting things. I found three patents related to canning. This hermetic sealing patent from 1854. This one was when he was in Cincinnati. Another one, preserve cans, 1859. And then a great one, the fruit jar cover from 1862. Now, these are things that were kind of dabbling, I think. But what he really got into were more telegraph-related projects. One of which was an electric semaphore signal, which is, the flags on railroads. He invented a semaphore system that was used for apparently quite a long time in the railroad system, an electric semaphore signal system. I have not yet found that patent. But he also invented a couple of telegraphs, a duplex telegraph in 1871, which I have found a patent for, and then he invented a quadruplex telegraph. And by quadruplex, that means you can send 4 messages in directions at the same time. In the 1870s, this was hot stuff, going from being able to send 1 message at a time. Wait, they send it back. The duplex, you're sending them 2 places, either end, and then with a quadruplex, you're sending them 2 at a time. So he came up with this idea in 1867, demonstrated it in 1871. These years are very important. And exhibited it in 1873 at the Cincinnati Exposition. However, he didn't receive a patent until 1877. At the same time, this other little fellow by the name of Thomas Edison was developing a quadruplex telegraph. Edison received the patent in 1878, 1 year after Nicholson got his. I still don't have Nicholson's 1877 patent. Nicholson filed a lawsuit against Edison, which was financed by Western Union Telegraph, of all folks. However, we're talking Thomas Edison. He was hot stuff at the time. And though eventually Nicholson won the suit, the financial drain of fighting Thomas Edison pretty much took it out of him. Ultimately, the 1933 Journal of the American Electrical Society gave credit to both Nicholson and Edison for a quadruplex telegraph in 1875. So they're both credited, even though no one, of course, has any clue who Henry Clay Nicholson is. The long and short of it is the fight against Edison, and then apparently a fall from a horse that Henry took at about the same time, created quite a hardship on the family. And in 1877, November of 1877, Henry Clay up and moved the family to California in southern Kent County. Now, to orient you, this is what it was called on the 1883 atlas. It's called California. It's now known as Nicholson, of course. But here's the Independence Turnpike, now Madison Pike, the Taylor Mill Road, right along that junction. And this is the Nicholson property. They actually originally bought 108 acres, and this is from 1891. It's a couple years later. And that's where George had a store later on, probably a tobacco warehouse, but we're not really sure. And then this is the family home. Eventually, this little crossroads came to be known as the bustling Mecca of Nicholson, which you probably would miss if you blinked. Still today. That ends what I have to say about Henry Clay. Like I said, George was about 17 when the family moved to Nicholson, California. Before about 1901, we really don't know what George was up to. This is taken from that other picture, obviously. Probably doing some farm work, maybe some light construction. We just don't know. Got married in 1897 to a woman named Ida M. Kyle. They married in Claremont County. And then a year later, she came down to Kenton County with him. This is Ida with Maud. George and Ida had 3 children. George Kyle, more commonly known just as Kyle, and he ended up going to UK and getting an engineering degree in 1922. That's where this picture's from. Jenny May, born in 1903, and then Raymond, born in 1905. Kyle, by the way, eventually became a Walton City Councilman. Raymond and Kyle both joined the family business with his father, with their father, and that's when it became George Nicholson and Sons. They carried on the business after he died in 1960, but to what extent I don't yet know. I've been told that they continued to build houses in Kenton County in the subdivisions of Arcadia, Harris, Riddle, and South Hills. Haven't researched that yet. But what we figured out is that Kyle was definitely as gifted a builder as his father, and also an architect, and Raymond had some architectural skill as well. Raymond, whereas Kyle went right into construction after school, Raymond dabbled in auto sales for a few years, and then he jumped into the family business. And apparently, they neither one married. Raymond was said to be shy, never married. Kyle broke off an engagement at one point to stay with his brother, and they both lived to their last days in the family home on Main Street. So they were a strong bond between these two men. Jenny, or Jenny May is what she was called, ended up marrying C.D. Charles Benson, son Dewey Benson, who was a one-time to-be professional baseball player. And all of these children lived into the mid-1980s. So we talked about not really knowing what George was up to until about 1900. Well, I'm going to step back and talk about that in a minute, but the big thing was 1906. They left California, moved all the way to Walton. This is what Walton started to look like after the railroads came through in 1860s and 70s. It was starting to come up. But George and a man named Robert Ratcliffe, who I don't know anything about, bought 2.66 acres on South Main Street. The family moved there in 1906. Why did they move? It's a big city. For crying out loud. You're not going to get anything done in Nicholson, Kentucky. You've got to move to Walton. You're on the railroad lines. There's at least 2 lumber mills, a brickmaker, hardware stores, everything you could ever want in Walton, as well as a market. It's a business decision, is my guess. The population at that time was 538. That's practically a metropolis. I'm not sure. I think this is the house they moved into. I don't think he built it, because this is like an 1870s, 1880s house. I think they bought an existing property on South Main, and this is 102 South Main. It's clearly labeled on the back with a date. And then he built 104 South Main. We'll get to that in just a second. So here's Walton, 1900 or so. Big city. Turnpike. Short line railroad, as they called it. Louisville, Lexington, Cincinnati, Lexington. Now the L&N. Queen and Crescent, also known as the Cincinnati Southern, or Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific, or any other handful of names you can think of. Like I said, construction materials were available in Walton. There was a market. The first one, we'll talk about this 104 South Main Street. I think he built it probably right when they bought that property. And I think he built it for this Ratcliffe character, Rebecca and Robert Ratcliffe. Here's George in this picture. Now I got a bunch of pictures of this house I'll show you. There he is. He was prolific. As far as I've been able to tell so far, the Nicholsons were responsible for 7 schools, 3 churches, 2 banks, numerous other commercial buildings, the Walton City building, at least a couple of roads, at least 1 bridge, and I have no clue how many residences. Hundreds of that. George and the boys did all phases of construction except plumbing and electrical. George was a perfectionist. He's known to demand reconstruction of a part of a job or all of it if it wasn't up to his standards. So in some respects, his folks weren't crazy about working for him. But the long and short of it was job security because of the reputation he built, fed on itself. He was highly sought after for building projects in northern Kentucky and even outside of the area. Apparently, he went back to the homestead in Mount Washington in 1927 to consult with the community on plans for building a new bank. So, first big construction project we know about that Nicholson was involved in is the Walton Graded School from 1901. Building is still there. It's apartments now. The property was purchased in 1900, and George Nicholson was trained to build it, retained to build it. And it's kind of nominally Georgian colonial revival detailing. Most of these churches have very little architectural style, if any. What I'm going to do is go through schools, and I'm going to skip around on dates a little bit. The next school we know about is the Verona graded school, which is also pretty minimal. Looks the same floor plan, really. This one was built for $10,000. George's $10,090 was the lowest bid. I would be willing to bet that the next highest bid was $10,100. But he had a low bid, and he got the job. This one was converted to an elementary school in 1954, abandoned in 1971, and the county's Historic Preservation Board put it on the National Register in 2000. So it is on the National Register of Historic Places. And it's vaguely neoclassical, if you want to call this little roof balustrade neoclassical. But again, it's functional, it does the job. The next one, and I'm not sure about this picture, whether this is the right Erlanger Ellesmere School. It's the only picture of an Erlanger Ellesmere High School I can find, but I have my suspicions that this might be before. It's hard to say. George was awarded the contract to build this in Erlanger Ellesmere School in 1928, a $39,000 school. This is clearly a more expensive school than Verona or Walton, if you look at this building here. But it's really, form-wise, the same kind of thing. It's just a little bit more high style because it was designed by a man named Howard McClory, who also designed the St. Augustine Church on Euclid Avenue in Covington, St. Anne's Convent in Melbourne, and then a few other things in Kentucky over the years. But again, I'm not positive that this is the right building. If anybody knows anything otherwise, please let me know. In 1928, George built another school in Park Hills. I've never found a picture of this. And that was a $52,000 project, so it's got to be pretty extravagant for those times. It was only a 6-room school with a gym. Somewhere in Park Hills, I don't know where. It probably doesn't exist anymore, but you never know. And that was also designed by an architect, a man named Thomas Colby. Here's another extravagant one. This is the Forest Hill School, also 1928. 1928 was a hot year for George. His bid of $15,000 was a low bid. Kenton County Education Board gave him the job. School is on Grand Avenue in South Covington. And again, you know, at the most you might say neoclassical. And you'll see that he did a lot of neoclassical things. Now the biggies that George and Sons got involved in were Simon Kenton. This project was actually dreamed up in 1928, but it wasn't funded until 1936, and Nicholson didn't finish it until 1937. It's a 3-story building with a gym, auditorium, bathrooms, and showers. And it was considered a model of modern design, boasting every known convenience as of 1937. It's fireproof, with nothing wood but the doors, separate washrooms for boys and girls, private offices for the superintendent and principal. You can even show moving pictures in the auditorium. This was a progress administration project. We're going to see a number of those school projects this time, in the late 30s. The Walton Advertiser declared the building to be a monument to Nicholson and Sons' skill and ingenuity. Every detail was rigidly gone over until all work was perfect. I think that pretty much sums up Nicholson. One other school, Burlington High School. This was another WPA, PWA, whatever you want to call them, project. This is a $72,000 project. 45% of that was funded by the government, federal government, Roosevelt, and then Boone County bonded the other 55%. Now, I just found this out today, and I'm going to skip ahead and mention it, that at the exact same time that Boone County applied for the grant for this, they applied for a grant for an addition to the courthouse in Burlington. And they hired Kyle to draw the plans. And he drew the plans, was paid $100, and I think they submitted both grants at the same time, and this grant won. So they never put on the addition. It was going to be on the west side of the courthouse, on Jefferson Street, with a 6-room addition with a door opening onto Jefferson Street. Now we all know that in 1960 or so they put on the annex on the east side of the courthouse. So for whatever reason, The 1938 thing didn't happen, and they waited another 20 some odd years to do it. And now we're talking about tearing it off. And then in another 50 years, they'll talk about putting it back on. Actually, what's interesting is this is designed by a fellow named Abner Foster, and along kind of like the Simon Kenton School is kind of an Art Moderne, Art Deco feel. Kyle did all of the interior drawing plans and really worked it up. So whereas Foster was the architect, Kyle did the nuts and bolts of this thing. And I think he was the real brain trust in the firm at this time. I suspect that George was probably superintending construction and Kyle was taking care of the details and making sure that things were done in terms of being designed properly. All right, so we talked about churches, we talked about schools, and I can hit on a number of these houses that they did over the years, including practically everything on South Main Street in Walton. Here's 104 South Main. Now what's confusing to me is that there are a number of pictures in Amber Benson's collection of family members standing in front of this house. And at first I thought they had built this for themselves and this was the family home. And then I just wondered if maybe they took pictures in front of it because it was the first house that he built in Walton. I'm not really sure, and they certainly lived next door. They lived at 102. This is 104. Family in the front. You know, that's his wife and kids. And if you zoom in real close, I can tell that those are the same people. And then here's that picture I showed earlier with May and Ida in front of 104 South Main Street. So it's a little confusing, but you know, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Ratcliffe and his wife apparently lived there for at least 15 years. 102 South Main was built about 1925, and I would be willing to bet that Kyle designed this thing. And it's brick construction, which is kind of a Nicholson hallmark. You're going to see a lot of really nice brick construction.
That's his house.
Yeah, I know. I've got your deed search. Well, this is George Nicholson's house from about 1925. I guess they lived there till the mid-'80s.
My father said that the original house there at this 102 burnt down.
That's why they built
that
it.
one going
All
on.
right, all right. I wondered if that was the story. It didn't seem to fit that they would just tear down a perfectly good house to replace it. That's not their style. So 102, family home in Walton for many, many years. 108, simple frame bungalow. 116, another bungalow. 1922. Yet another bungalow. Starting to see a lot of bungalows. Why? Because it's the 1920s. That's what people want. But he wasn't just doing bungalow houses on Main Street. From what I can figure out, he built this as well. Doc Mullen's garage. And this one, which I really like. 117 South Main. See, this is an American Foursquare built about the same time that they built 104 South Main, give or take, 1911. And then it wasn't until the 20s that they started switching into the bungalows. But these things were built, there's a fair number of these built around Boone County at that time, between 1905 and 1915 or so. Then they switched into the bungalows. Here's a shot showing 117, and I'd be willing to bet if I could find out that he probably built that too. Basically, my feeling is if it's brick and it was built in 1905 to 1925 in Walton, it was probably built by Nicholson. And most of the frame structures are probably built by him as well. Not all of them. There's another one. How we figured out, how I figured out that he built some of these is I told Lori to look at the deeds, and if Nicholson or his sons owned a lot at some time, and they were actively involved in subdividing, so they would go in on a subdivision with somebody else and sell off lots. And you could tell they would hold on to a lot for a couple of years, and suddenly they'd sell it off. I know they built that house. Or you look at it and you go, that just screams Nicholson. And Margot can confirm this. There's some of the buildings you look at them and you know that Nicholson built them. And sometimes people have just said, oh yeah, George Nicholson built this. There's another one on North Main, a fellow told me not too long ago that house was built by Nicholson, but the one next to him was built by another man. They built roads, and this is really interesting. This is the only known divided boulevard in the county, certainly from this time, Alta Vista Drive. And the Nicholsons were actively involved in subdividing Alta Vista. And they built this road in 1929. They built a couple of the houses in here, including 15 Alta Vista, which was
That's county.
the Nicholas and Gertrude Blau house, and more popularly known as the Van Landingham house. We put that on the National Register last year. And then that was from the early 30s. After the war, I think they were doing some more. 9 Alta Vista Drive. And I think this was owned by James Falls. And I suspect strongly that Kyle designed it, or Raymond. It just screams of Kyle. No, they're just spectacular bungalow. Just a wonderful house in brick. This is the John Clifton and Ann Catherine Mayhew house, also known as the Hartman house, also known as the Bedinger house, and it's probably got half a dozen other names. Listed in the National Register in 2005. Here's one that I suspect is a Nicholson house, but I don't have any evidence yet. The R.W. Jones house on South Main Street. But that brickwork it just looks so much like Nicholson. Because he or someone that worked for him was a master bricklayer. They also built at least one house up here, or up in Burlington. That was for his daughter and son-in-law, Benson. And I got one more example, and I'm hoping somebody in this room is going to say, yeah, I know exactly what it is. But I had no idea. But this is in the collection, and I think that's them building it. I mean, that's clearly something they built. The question is, I don't know what. Bungalow triplets. All right.
Matt, what is the definition of a bungalow?
Margot, what's the definition of a bungalow?
Okay, it's a type of house that was extremely popular in this country beginning in, late 1900s till about the Second World War. It actually was inspired by the traditional homes of India, which were called banglas. That's where the name comes from. It's a corruption of the word bangla. This is their kind of classic bungalow here, 1.5 stories high, roof's kind of gently pitched, not too steep. Big, broad front porch usually goes all the way across the front. Often one or more big dormers on the second level to bring more light and air and headroom to the second floor. Informal rooms usually don't have formal entry halls. The front door generally opens right into the living room. Usually there is a living room, dining room, and a kitchen on the first floor, and sometimes 1 or 2 bedrooms at the back of the house near where the kitchen is, and also a full bath, usually between 2 of the bedrooms. And if they have a second floor, generally the second floor is also divided into 2 bedrooms. Although in Detroit, where I grew up, they actually built some 2-family bungalows. They were called income bungalows, and they were designed so you could rent the second floor to another one of your fellow industrial laborers. Very comfortable and versatile and sturdy houses.
There's a lot of them left.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them built wall, a lot of them in Florence, and a lot in Burlington.
Yep.
Because people had a little more money in the teens and 20s. So you get a lot of bungalows, which is great. I love them. Residences, let's go and look at churches, which are, I think, where you find his masterworks. The First Baptist Church in Walton in 1914. This thing is just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Matt,
Yes.
can I interrupt a second? I'm
Yeah.
a historian for that church.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder if you were going to show that. I'm thinking that the church paid $12,000, a little over $12,000 for him to build that.
Right. That's what I got. You know anything? Any other details?
Well, we have incorporated a couple of the smaller windows in the
Yeah.
face of the present educational building. That building was removed in the late 1960s.
Mhm.
An educational building had been built behind it, which is now, what now faces Main Street. And that is called the Nicholson Addition, but it was built by his son. It was built by Kyle. And so we have put some smaller of those windows were gorgeous.
These,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
In the face of that, of the Nicholson building, as we call it. And then we put two of them inside the present sanctuary. But apparently the ceiling fell in 1966 or 7.
Mhm. And that's what it cost.
They said the flat roof had caused a lot of problems.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that it was, they laid the cornerstone in September 1913. The church was dedicated in October 1914. Replaced in 1976, but you say 66, as it is, and then, you know, some of it was incorporated into that Nicholson Educational Building. Since we are fortunate to have an architectural historian here, neoclassical, Tudor, Jacobean,
That is a, neoclassical cornice, the windows, definitely inspiration from the Jacobean
this stuff.
Tudor style. So it's a hybrid,
Yeah.
like a lot of Nicholson's buildings, but wonderful building, great brickwork.
I wanted
That
to
polychrome
design it.
two-tone brickwork is just wonderful.
This stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of texture in that building.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, equally, and in fact even a little more dramatic, if you ask me, was the Christian church, built in 1918. And by the way, when I have a little parentheses year, that's when I think the picture was taken.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that business is about. Another really neoclassical building, even with a little bit of mission detailing up here.
Mm-hmm.
This business going on, but I love this
Portico.
incredible portico.
Mhm.
Really dramatic building. And some of the pictures that I've seen of Walton, you can see that this building sticking up from the middle of town very clearly.
That burned down in
Mhm.
57
Christmas Eve, 1947, $100,000 damage.
on Thanksgiving night.
And they rebuilt it.
I have, and Kyle built that one really.
Mm-hmm.
The front of that is laid up of Indiana Bedford stone.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, and my father said that George P laid that as his last job.
Mm.
Interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that one.
That's his last job.
Nice job to lay that stone. But considering what was left of the original church, I don't think, they didn't do such a bad job rebuilding on that foundation.
Yeah,
The footprint was the same,
Mhm.
and just adapted it.
that foundation was laid up by a black man that had the reputation as to being the finest stonemason in the state.
Were they employees of him or
No,
subcons?
no. He come in here.
Subs.
His name is on the side of it, and I forget Eugene something, and I forgot.
Okay. I don't have a picture of this, but the Walton United Methodist Church, Kyle apparently put on the Sunday School edition in 1953.
Yeah.
Other non-residential structures, Walton Equitable Bank, 1927, built for a cost of $52,000, of wire cut brick and stone with columns flanking